At my husband's funeral, an unknown number wouldn't stop calling me. When I finally answered, I received a warning. Don't sleep at home tonight. My daughter-in-law insisted on taking me home, but when I realized she began locking the house, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined that the worst day of my life would be followed by something even more terrifying. Harold's funeral was everything you'd expect. Somber, respectful, filled with people who spoke in hushed tones about what a good man he was. At 65, I thought I knew what grief looked like. I thought I understood loss. But sitting in that front pew, watching them lower my husband of 42 years into the ground, I realized I knew nothing about the darkness that was about to consume my life. The service had ended an hour ago, and I was still standing by his grave, unable to move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and every breath seemed to require more effort than I had left in me. Harold was gone. The man who had been my everything, my anchor, my safe harbor in every storm. He was really gone. Mrs. Nadine, you need to come inside now. Nova's voice cut through my thoughts, gentle but insistent. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder, her perfectly applied makeup somehow still intact despite the tears she'd shed during the ceremony. My daughter-in-law had been Harold's pride and joy ever since she married our son Marcus 5 years ago. She was beautiful, successful, and had this way of making everyone around her feel special. Today, she was the picture of the devoted daughter-in-law, making sure I ate, accepting condolences on my behalf, handling details I couldn't bear to think about. Just a few more minutes, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the wind rustling through the cemetery trees. It's getting cold, and you haven't eaten anything all day. Nova's concern seemed genuine, her brown eyes soft with what looked like real worry. Harold wouldn't want you to make yourself sick. She was right, of course. Harold would have scolded me for standing out in the October chill without a proper coat. He always worried about me catching pneumonia, especially after I'd had that bad bout with bronchitis last winter. But I couldn't seem to make my feet move away from this place, away from him. That's when my phone started ringing. The sound was jarring in the quiet cemetery, and I fumbled through my purse with shaking hands. Unknown number. I almost declined the call. The last thing I wanted was to deal with some telemarketer today of all days. But something made me hesitate. Aren't you going to answer that? Nova asked, her hand still on my shoulder. I swiped to accept the call and lifted the phone to my ear. Hello? Silence, then heavy breathing. Then a voice I didn't recognize. Female, older, with a slight rasp like she'd been smoking for years. Nadine Caldwell? Yes, this is Nadine. Who is this? More silence. Then, don't go home tonight. My blood turned to ice. Excuse me? Who is this? But the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling even more now. Nova was watching me with a concerned expression, her head tilted slightly to one side. Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Wrong number, I lied, though I wasn't sure why. Something about that voice, about the urgency in those 4 words, had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Just someone trying to sell me something. Nova nodded sympathetically. People have no respect anymore. Come on, let's get you home. As we walked toward the parking lot, my phone rang again. Same unknown number. This time, I answered immediately. Who is this? What do you want? Listen to me carefully. The woman's voice was more urgent now. Nova is not who you think she is. Do not let her take you anywhere. Do not be alone with her. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I don't understand. Who are you? How do you know Nova? There's no time to explain everything now. Just remember what I'm telling you. Don't trust her. Don't go to her house. Don't let her stay at yours. She's been planning this for months. Planning what? You're scaring me. Good. You should be scared. She killed Harold, and you're next. The line went dead again, and I stopped walking so abruptly that Nova, who had been walking slightly ahead of me, turned around with a puzzled expression. Nadine, what's wrong? You look like you're about to faint. I was. The world seemed to be tilting sideways, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. The woman's words echoed in my head. She killed Harold, and you're next. It was insane. Harold had died of a heart attack. The doctors had been very clear about that. He'd been having chest pains for weeks, despite my begging him to see a cardiologist. When it finally happened, it was sudden but not unexpected. And Nova? Sweet, caring Nova, who had been holding my hand through every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night when Harold was in pain? Nova, who had organized today's entire funeral because I was too destroyed to function? The idea was ridiculous. I'm just tired, I managed to say. This day has been. I know. Nova's voice was full of compassion as she wrapped her arm around my waist, supporting my weight. You don't need to explain. Let's get you somewhere warm and quiet. We reached her car, a sleek black BMW that always made me feel slightly uncomfortable. Too expensive, too flashy for someone who claimed to be struggling financially like Nova always did. But Marcus made good money at his accounting firm, and Nova had her real estate business. Maybe I was just old-fashioned about money. As Nova helped me into the passenger seat, my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number again. She drugged his coffee every morning for 3 weeks, made his heart weak. Check his pill organizer. She switched his heart medication with sugar pills. You have maybe 6 hours before she does the same to you. I quickly deleted the message before Nova could see it, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. This was crazy. Someone was playing a sick joke on me, taking advantage of my grief to torment me. But why? And how did they know about Harold's heart medication? How did they know Nova's name? Ready? Nova asked as she started the engine. The heating immediately kicked in, warming my frozen fingers. Actually, I said, my voice stronger than I expected, I think I want to go home. To my own house. Nova's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. If I hadn't been watching her so carefully, I might have missed it. For just a second, her smile faltered, and something cold flickered in her eyes. Oh, honey, I don't think that's a good idea. You shouldn't be alone right now, especially not in that big empty house. Why don't you come stay with Marcus and me for a few days? I've already prepared the guest room. That's very sweet, but I need to be around Harold's things. I need to feel close to him. Nadine. Nova's voice was still gentle, but there was a firmness underneath it now. I really think you should reconsider. Grief can make people do unpredictable things. What if you fall down those stairs? What if you forget to turn off the stove? Marcus would never forgive me if something happened to you. The reasonable part of my brain knew she was right. The house did feel too big and empty without Harold. And I had been forgetting little things lately, where I put my keys, whether I'd taken my vitamins. But something about the way Nova was insisting, the way she seemed to have already decided where I was going to spend the night, made me uncomfortable. I appreciate your concern, but I'm going home. Nova was quiet for a long moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Finally, she sighed. Okay, but I'm staying with you tonight. I won't take no for an answer on that. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. My heart started racing again, but I couldn't answer it with Nova sitting right next to me. Aren't you going to get that? Nova asked, her voice carefully casual. Probably another telemarketer. I'll let it go to voicemail. But as we drove toward my house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. The moment we pulled into my driveway, I knew I'd made a mistake. Not about coming home. Being here felt right, like Harold's presence was still somehow lingering in the familiar walls and windows. No. My mistake was letting Nova come with me. Something had shifted in her demeanor during the 20-minute drive from the cemetery. The concerned daughter-in-law act was still there, but underneath it was something harder, more calculating. Why don't you go rest while I make us some tea? Nova suggested as she helped me out of the car. Her grip on my arm was firmer than necessary, almost possessive. I can make my own tea, Nova. I'm grieving, not helpless. She laughed, but it sounded forced. Of course you can. I just thought you might want to put your feet up for a while. This has been such an exhausting day. As we approached the front door, I noticed Nova was carrying an overnight bag I hadn't seen her pack. When had she gotten that? Had it been in her car the whole time, like she'd been planning to stay over regardless of what I wanted? Inside, the house felt different. Everything looked the same. Harold's reading glasses still on the side table, his coffee mug still in the sink from the morning he died 3 days ago, but the air felt heavier somehow, charged with tension I couldn't quite identify. "You know what?" Nova said, setting her bag down in the hallway and immediately walking to the front door. "Let me just lock this up for the night. You can never be too careful these days." I watched her turn the deadbolt, then slide the chain lock into place. When had I gotten a chain lock? I didn't remember having one of those, but then again, my memory hadn't been reliable lately. The grief was affecting everything, making me question things I should know for certain. "There," Nova said with satisfaction, nice and secure. She moved through the house with an odd familiarity, like she'd been planning this moment. In the kitchen, she opened cabinets I rarely used, pulling out a tea kettle I'd forgotten I owned and honey from a shelf I could barely reach. How did she know where everything was? "Why don't you sit down, Nadine? You look exhausted." I was exhausted, bone deep and soul weary in a way I'd never experienced before. The kitchen chair felt like salvation as I sank into it, finally allowing my body to fully relax for the first time all day. That's when I noticed Nova watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't concern anymore. It was something closer to satisfaction. "Nova, can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey. Anything." "How did you know where I keep the honey? I barely remember buying it." She didn't miss a beat. "Marcus mentioned it once. He said you always keep honey in the cabinet above the microwave because Harold liked it in his coffee." That sounded reasonable, but something about her answer felt rehearsed. And Harold had been diabetic for 10 years. He hadn't used honey in anything during that entire time. My phone, which I'd set on the counter, buzzed with another text. Nova glanced at it, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Popular today, aren't you? That's the 4th call since we left the cemetery." I picked up the phone before she could see the screen. The message was from the same unknown number. "Look in Harold's pill organizer. Top shelf of bathroom medicine cabinet. Check the pills against the prescription labels. Do it now while she's distracted." My hands started shaking again. Either someone was playing an incredibly cruel prank on me, or I didn't want to think about the or. "Everything okay?" Nova asked, moving closer to me. Too close. "Just someone from the funeral home. Details about the final bill." "Oh, don't worry about that now. Marcus and I will handle all of that. You shouldn't have to think about money at a time like this." The tea kettle whistled, and Nova turned away to pour the water. While her back was to me, I quickly read the rest of the text. "She's been slowly poisoning him for weeks. Heart medication replaced with lactose pills. Coffee laced with digitalis. Makes heart failure look natural. You're next. Get out of there now." My vision started to blur, and for a moment I thought I might actually faint. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me, in quiet suburban neighborhoods where the biggest excitement was usually someone parking their trash cans incorrectly. But as I watched Nova prepare the tea, I noticed she was being very careful about which cup she used. She had 2 identical mugs, and she was very deliberately putting honey in only one of them. Mine. "Here you go," she said, setting the steaming mug in front of me. "Chamomile with honey, just like Harold used to make for you." Harold had never made me tea with honey. He'd been diabetic. He would never have kept honey in the house, let alone used it in anything he served me. "Thank you," I said, not picking up the mug. "I think I need to use the bathroom first." "Of course, take your time." I stood up slowly, hoping she couldn't see how badly my legs were shaking. The walk to the bathroom felt like it took forever, but I could feel Nova's eyes on me the entire time. In the bathroom, I closed the door and immediately went to the medicine cabinet. There, on the top shelf, was Harold's weekly pill organizer, the same blue plastic container he'd used for 5 years to keep track of his medications. With trembling fingers, I opened the compartment labeled with today's date. The pills inside looked wrong. Harold's heart medication was supposed to be small and white with a distinctive scored line down the middle. These pills were white too, but they were round and smooth. I pulled out one of Harold's prescription bottles to compare. The pills in the organizer were completely different from what was in the bottle. I opened the other compartments, checking each day of the week. Every single one contained the wrong pills. Someone had systematically replaced Harold's life-saving heart medication with what looked like. I picked up one of the fake pills and examined it closely. It looked like lactose tablets, the kind you could buy at any pharmacy. My husband had been dying slowly for weeks, and I hadn't known. A soft knock on the bathroom door made me jump. "Nadine, are you feeling all right in there? You've been gone for quite a while." "I'm fine," I called back, though my voice sounded strangled, just feeling a little dizzy. "Why don't you come have your tea? It'll help settle your stomach." I quickly put the pill organizer back exactly as I'd found it and flushed the toilet to maintain the illusion that I'd been using the bathroom normally. When I opened the door, Nova was standing right outside, closer than she should have been. "Better?" she asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Much better, thank you." Back in the kitchen, the tea was still steaming on the table. Nova had been waiting for me, her own cup untouched. "Drink up," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "You need to stay hydrated." I picked up the mug, brought it to my lips, and pretended to take a sip. The liquid was bitter underneath the honey, with a metallic taste that definitely wasn't chamomile. "It's delicious," I lied, setting the mug back down. "But maybe a little too hot still." Nova's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance, but she quickly covered it with another smile. "Of course. Let it cool down a bit." She stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the darkening sky. That's when I noticed something else that made my blood run cold. Nova was wearing gloves. Thin, flesh-colored latex gloves that I hadn't noticed before because they matched her skin tone so perfectly. Why would someone wear gloves to make tea? Unless they didn't want to leave fingerprints. My phone buzzed again, and this time Nova moved quickly to intercept it. But I was faster, grabbing it before she could reach it. "Sarah?" Nova asked, reading the name on the screen. "Who's Sarah?" I didn't know anyone named Sarah. The unknown number had apparently saved itself in my contacts under that name. "An old friend," I said, declining the call. "I'll talk to her tomorrow." But Nova's entire demeanor had changed. The mask of concern had slipped, and what I saw underneath made my mouth go dry with fear. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the warmth she'd been showing me all day. "Nadine," she said slowly, "I think you should drink your tea now." It wasn't a suggestion anymore, it was a command. And that's when I noticed she had moved between me and the only exit from the kitchen. "I'm not really thirsty anymore," I said, pushing the mug away from me slightly. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, which was a small miracle considering my heart was hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. Nova's smile was razor-thin now, all pretense of warmth gone. "But you need to stay hydrated, Nadine, especially after such a stressful day. Harold would want you to take care of yourself." The way she said Harold's name made my skin crawl. There was possession in it, ownership, like she had some claim to my husband's memory that superseded my own. "How long have you been planning this?" The question came out before I could stop myself. Nova tilted her head, feigning confusion, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes. "Planning what, honey?" "I'm just trying to take care of you." "The pills. Harold's medication. How long have you been replacing them?" For a moment, the kitchen was completely silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock Harold had bought me for our 20th anniversary. Nova stared at me with those cold eyes, and I could practically see her deciding whether to keep up the act or drop it entirely. She chose to drop it. 6 weeks, she said simply, her voice now devoid of any warmth or artificial concern. It would have been longer, but Harold was more observant than I gave him credit for. He started asking questions about why he was feeling worse instead of better. The casual way she admitted it hit me like a physical blow. 6 weeks. My husband had been suffering for 6 weeks, his body slowly failing as his heart medication was systematically replaced with useless pills, and I had attributed his decline to stress and age. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Nova laughed, and the sound was nothing like the gentle, concerned daughter-in-law I thought I knew. This laugh was sharp and bitter, full of years of resentment I'd never suspected existed. "Why do you think, Nadine? Money. It's always about money, isn't it? Do you have any idea what it's like to watch you and Harold live in this beautiful house, taking vacations, buying whatever you want, while Marcus and I struggle to pay our rent. But Marcus has a good job. And your real estate business, my real estate business is failing, has been for 2 years. And Marcus's good job barely covers our basic expenses, let alone the lifestyle I deserve. Nova moved closer to me, and I instinctively pressed back in my chair. Do you know what our monthly expenses are? Do you know what it costs to maintain the image of success when you're drowning in debt? I thought about the BMW, the designer clothes, the expensive restaurants Nova was always posting about on social media. I'd assumed she and Marcus were doing well. I'd never thought to question it. So you decided to kill my husband for an inheritance that isn't even yours? Oh, but it will be. You see, Harold was very generous with his life insurance policy updates. After Marcus and I got married, he made sure I was listed as a secondary beneficiary on everything. And once you're gone. She shrugged as if she were discussing the weather. The room started spinning, and I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Marcus knows about this? Nova's expression shifted slightly, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion cross her face. Marcus doesn't know anything. He thinks his father died of natural causes, and he'll think the same about you. Poor Marcus, losing both parents so close together. The stress will be terrible for him, but I'll be there to comfort him. You're insane. I'm practical. Nova walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. This is digitalis, extracted from foxglove plants. In small doses over time, it mimics the symptoms of heart failure. Harold's doctor never suspected anything because his medical history supported the diagnosis. I watched in horror as she approached my tea mug with the vial. The beauty of it is that it's virtually undetectable in standard post-mortem tests, especially when the victim already has a history of heart problems. Which you do, don't you, Nadine? Those irregular heartbeats you mentioned to the doctor last month? She was right. I'd been having palpitations for weeks, which I'd attributed to stress from watching Harold's health decline. But now I wondered if she'd been testing small doses on me too. You've been poisoning me already. Just little tastes here and there. A few drops in your coffee when I visited. Some in that casserole I brought over last week. I needed to establish a pattern, create a medical history that would support your inevitable heart failure. My phone, which was still on the table between us, suddenly rang. Nova glanced at it, and her face darkened when she saw Sarah on the caller ID again. Who is Sarah, Nadine? And don't lie to me this time. I honestly don't know. She's been calling all day, warning me about you. Nova's face went white. Actually white, like all the blood had drained from her features at once. What did she tell you? That you killed Harold? That I was next? That you'd been planning this for months? Describe her voice. Older, raspy, like she'd been smoking for years. I watched Nova's reaction carefully. You know who it is, don't you? Nova was quiet for a long moment, staring at the phone like it was a venomous snake. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. It can't be her. She's supposed to be in Florida. Who, Nova? Who's supposed to be in Florida? Instead of answering, Nova grabbed my phone and answered the call, putting it on speaker. Hello, Nova. The voice was exactly as I remembered it. Older, raspy, with an edge of steel underneath. Sarah. Nova's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. What do you want? I want you to step away from Nadine and walk out of that house right now. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Oh, but I do. I know exactly what you did to Harold. I know about the pills, the digitalis, all of it. I've been watching you for weeks. Nova's hand was shaking as she held the phone. You can't prove anything, can I? I have photos of you switching Harold's pills, video of you adding digitalis to his coffee, and I have a very detailed recording of the conversation you just had with Nadine, where you confessed to everything. My heart skipped a beat. Recording? How could she have been recording us? That's impossible. You're bluffing. Check Nadine's phone, Nova. Look at the apps. I've been connected this whole time. Nova grabbed my phone and started frantically scrolling through it. Her face went from white to green as she found what she was looking for. You installed a recording app on her phone. I installed several things on her phone. GPS tracking, remote access to the camera and microphone, automatic cloud backup of everything. I've been documenting your every move since the day Harold died. Nova looked at me with pure hatred. How long have you known about this? I didn't know, I said honestly. I've never seen this woman before in my life. But I've seen you, Nadine. Sarah's voice came through the phone speaker. Many times. Though I don't expect you to remember me. Something in her voice tugged at a memory I couldn't quite place. Familiar, but from where? I worked as Harold's secretary for 15 years, until I retired 3 years ago. He talked about you constantly, showed me pictures of every anniversary, every birthday, every vacation. You were his whole world. The memory hit me like a lightning bolt. Sarah Mitchell, Harold's secretary who had retired and moved to Florida to be closer to her grandchildren. I'd met her dozens of times at company parties and retirement dinners, but she looked so different now, older, thinner. Her voice changed by what looked like years of smoking. Sarah, but you moved to Florida. I did, but Harold called me 2 months ago. He was worried about Nova, suspicious about some irregularities in his medication schedule. He asked me to come back and keep an eye on things. Nova let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He knew, he suspected. He didn't want to believe his own daughter-in-law could be capable of something like this, but he couldn't ignore the evidence. That's why he changed his will 3 weeks before he died. What? Both Nova and I spoke at the same time. Harold added a clause to his will. If either he or Nadine died under suspicious circumstances within 5 years of each other, all assets would go to charity instead of family members. Nova, even if you had succeeded in killing them both, you wouldn't have gotten a penny. Nova stared at the phone in absolute shock. All of this, the months of planning, the slow murder of my husband, the attempt on my life, all of it had been for nothing. And that's when she completely snapped. The sound that came out of Nova's throat was barely human. It was a keening wail of rage and frustration that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her chest. She grabbed the tea mug with the poisoned tea and hurled it against the kitchen wall, where it shattered into dozens of pieces, leaving a brown stain across the white paint. All of this for nothing? She screamed, spittle flying from her lips. Months of planning, months of watching that old man die slowly, and for what? For nothing. I pressed myself back in my chair, terrified by the complete transformation in front of me. This wasn't the controlled, calculating woman who had calmly confessed to murder just minutes ago. This was someone who had lost all touch with reality. Nova. Sarah's voice came through the phone speaker, calm and steady. The police are already on their way. You need to stop this now before you make things worse for yourself. Worse? Nova laughed, but there was no humor in it. How could this possibly get worse? My husband thinks I'm a successful real estate agent. I've been lying to him for 2 years about how much money I make. We're 3 months behind on rent. Our credit cards are maxed out, and I just spent 6 weeks slowly murdering his father for an inheritance I'll never see. She started pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal, her movements erratic and unpredictable. I kept my eyes on her, trying to anticipate which way she might move, but also desperately looking for an escape route. The front door was locked, and Nova was between me and the back door. And now, Nova continued, her voice rising to a near shriek, now I'm going to prison for murder. Marcus will find out everything, and I'll lose the only good thing I ever had in my miserable life. You still have choices, Nova, Sarah said through the phone. You can surrender peacefully, you can get a lawyer, you can— Shut up. Nova grabbed the phone and threw it against the wall next to where the tea mug had shattered. The screen went black, and suddenly the kitchen was filled with an ominous silence. Nova stood there breathing heavily, staring at the broken phone. When she turned to look at me, her eyes were completely wild. But you, she said slowly, pointing at me with a shaking finger. You're still here. And if I'm going down, I'm not going down alone. She moved toward the kitchen drawer where she'd gotten the digitalis, but this time she pulled out something that made my blood freeze. A large carving knife, the one Harold used to slice the turkey every Thanksgiving. Nova, please. Think about Marcus. Think about what this will do to him. Marcus will get over it. He'll grieve for his father and his stepmother, and then he'll move on and find someone who actually deserves him. Someone who isn't a lying, manipulative failure. The knife gleamed under the kitchen lights as she took a step closer to me. I could see dried tea leaves and fragments of ceramic from the broken mug scattered across the floor around my feet. But if you kill me, they'll know it wasn't natural causes. Sarah has recordings of everything. The police will know you murdered me. I don't care anymore. At least this way, Harold's precious wife doesn't get to live happily ever after while I rot in prison. She raised the knife, and I knew I had seconds to act. My eyes fell on the shattered remains of the tea mug near my feet. Without thinking, I grabbed the largest piece I could reach and hurled it at Nova's face. It struck her just above the left eye, opening a gash that immediately began bleeding. Nova screamed and stumbled backward, the knife clattering to the floor as she pressed her hands to her face. I didn't wait to see how badly I'd hurt her. I lunged for the back door, my arthritic fingers fumbling with the deadbolt. Behind me, I could hear Nova cursing and scrambling around on the floor, probably looking for the knife. The lock finally turned, and I yanked the door open, bursting out into the cold October night. My bare feet hit the wooden deck, and I realized I'd left my shoes inside, but there was no time to go back for them. "You bitch!" Nova's voice followed me into the darkness. "You're not getting away from me." I ran toward my neighbor's house, my feet already numb from the cold concrete of the driveway. The Hendersons were an older couple who went to bed early, but their porch light was still on. I pounded on their front door with both fists. "Help me! Please! Someone's trying to kill me!" Behind me, I heard Nova's footsteps on the driveway. She was following me, and she still had the knife. The porch light at the Henderson house came on, and I heard the sound of multiple locks being undone. "Mr." Henderson opened the door just wide enough to peek out, his gray hair disheveled and his eyes wide with alarm. "Nadine? What on earth?" "Call 911, I gasped, pushing past him into the safety of his living room. "Nova's trying to kill me! She murdered Harold!" Mrs. Henderson appeared in her bathrobe, already reaching for the phone. "What's going on?" We heard screaming. "She poisoned my husband, and now she's trying to kill me too. Please, just call the police." Mr. Henderson locked the door behind me and peered out through the window blinds. "There's someone in your yard, Nadine. She's got something in her hand." Through the thin walls of the Henderson house, we could hear Nova screaming my name, her voice carrying clearly through the night air. "Nadine, get out here! You can't hide forever. I'll burn this whole neighborhood down if I have to." Mrs. Henderson was already on the phone with 911, giving them our address and explaining the situation as calmly as she could manage. I collapsed onto their sofa, my legs finally giving out from the adrenaline and terror. "The police are on their way," Mrs. Henderson said, sitting down next to me and wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. "They said to stay inside and keep the doors locked." "What about Nova? What if she tries to break in?" "She won't," Mr. Henderson said grimly. He was still looking out the window, but now he was holding his old hunting rifle. "I've got eyes on her. She's standing in your driveway, but she hasn't moved toward our house." We sat in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Nova had stopped screaming, which somehow made everything more frightening. What was she planning now? Finally, we heard the wail of sirens approaching. Red and blue lights began flashing through the Hendersons' front windows, painting the walls in alternating colors. "They're here," Mrs. Henderson said, squeezing my hand. Through the window, we watched as 2 police cars pulled into my driveway. Nova was still standing there, but she'd dropped the knife and was just standing motionless in the middle of the driveway like she was in a trance. The police officers approached her carefully, their hands on their weapons but not drawn. One of them was speaking to her, though we couldn't hear what he was saying from inside the Henderson house. Nova didn't resist when they put the handcuffs on her. She just stood there like a broken doll, staring at the ground. "Ma'am?" There was a knock on the Hendersons' door. "This is Officer Martinez with the city police. We understand Mrs. Caldwell is inside." Mr. Henderson opened the door, and I found myself face to face with a young Hispanic officer who looked barely old enough to be out of high school. "Mrs. Caldwell? I'm Officer Martinez. We have the suspect in custody, but we need to get your statement about what happened here tonight." I looked back at my house, where more police cars were arriving and crime scene tape was already being strung up around the yard. Tomorrow, this would all be over. Nova would be in jail, the truth about Harold's death would come out, and I would finally be safe. But tonight, sitting in my neighbor's living room wrapped in a borrowed blanket, I realized that even though I'd survived, nothing would ever be the same again. The police station waiting room smelled like stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. I'd been sitting in the same uncomfortable plastic chair for 3 hours, giving statement after statement to detective after detective. My feet were bandaged from running barefoot across the driveway, and I was wearing a donated sweater from the police station's lost and found because my clothes had been taken as evidence. Detective Sarah Chen, not to be confused with the Sarah who had saved my life, sat across from me with a thick folder of papers and a digital recorder. She was a small woman with kind eyes, but there was steel underneath her gentle demeanor. "I know this is difficult, Mrs. Caldwell, but we need to go through Harold's timeline one more time. When did you first notice changes in his condition?" I closed my eyes, trying to remember. The past 6 weeks felt like a blur of doctor's appointments and sleepless nights. Maybe early September? He started complaining about feeling more tired than usual. His doctor increased his medication dosage, but he seemed to get worse instead of better. And Nova was present during these medical appointments? Most of them. She was very helpful, actually. She took notes, asked questions I forgot to ask. I thought she was being a caring daughter-in-law. The irony of it made my stomach turn. Nova had been documenting Harold's decline not out of concern, but to make sure her murder plan was working. Detective Chen made notes in her file. We found the digitalis in Nova's purse, along with a small vial of what appears to be powdered lactose, the substance she was using to replace Harold's heart medication. We also found a detailed journal documenting his symptoms and her timeline for the poisoning. She kept a journal? Very detailed. Dates, dosages, Harold's reactions. She even wrote about her concerns that the process was taking too long and that Harold was becoming suspicious. The thought of Nova sitting somewhere, calmly writing about my husband's suffering like it was a science experiment, made me feel physically sick. "There's something else," Detective Chen said gently. "We need to tell you about Sarah Mitchell." My heart skipped. "Is she all right? I owe her my life." "She's fine, but her story is complicated." The detective opened another folder. Sarah Mitchell did work as Harold's secretary for 15 years. She did retire and move to Florida, but she never left. "I don't understand. She's been living in a small apartment about 10 miles from here. She's been watching your house for 2 months, taking photos, gathering evidence. She installed surveillance equipment on your property without your knowledge." I felt the blood drain from my face. She was stalking us? Not exactly. Harold did call her just as she said, but not because he was suspicious of Nova. He called because he was worried about you. About me? Detective Chen pulled out a transcript of a phone call. "We found this on Harold's phone records. It's a conversation between Harold and Sarah from 6 weeks ago." She handed me the paper, and I read Harold's words with growing confusion. "Sarah, I'm worried about Nadine. She's been acting strange lately, forgetting things, getting confused about simple tasks. I think she might be developing dementia, but she refuses to see a doctor. I don't know what to do. If something happens to me, I need to know someone is looking out for her." My hands started shaking. "But I don't have dementia. Nova was drugging me too. We know that now." But Harold didn't. He genuinely believed you were developing memory problems, and he asked Sarah to keep an eye on you if anything happened to him. So, when he died, Sarah started watching your house, looking for signs that you needed help. That's when she noticed Nova's unusual behavior. The late-night visits, the way she was always carrying small vials or pill containers, the fact that she seemed to have keys to your house that you didn't know about. I thought about all the times Nova had shown up unexpectedly, always with a ready explanation for why she was there. I'd attributed it to her being a caring daughter-in-law, but now I realized she'd been coming to check on Harold's condition and to continue poisoning both of us. Sarah started taking photos and videos. When she saw Nova switching Harold's pills, she knew she had to act. But she needed solid evidence before she could go to the police. Why didn't she just call me directly? Why all the mysterious phone calls? She was afraid Nova was monitoring your communications. She knew Nova had access to your house and could easily have installed listening devices or tracking software on your phone. She was trying to warn you without tipping Nova off that she was being watched. It was all starting to make sense, but it also made me realize how close I'd come to death. If Sarah hadn't been watching, if she hadn't gathered evidence, if she hadn't called me when she did, I would be dead right now. What happens to Nova now? She's been charged with first-degree murder in Harold's death and attempted murder in your case. With the evidence Sarah gathered and Nova's own confession that we recorded, it's a very strong case. And Marcus? Does he know? Detective Chen's expression softened with sympathy. We called him about an hour ago. He's driving down from Sacramento. He had no idea about any of this, Mrs. Caldwell. As far as he knew, his father died of natural causes and his wife was a successful real estate agent. I couldn't imagine what Marcus was going through. Finding out that your father was murdered would be devastating enough, but learning that your own wife was the killer, that she had been lying to you about everything for years? He's asked to see you when you're ready. He wants to apologize for what Nova did. It's not his fault. No, but he feels responsible. He said there were signs he should have noticed. Nova's behavior with money, her obsession with your family's finances, the way she always seemed to know more about Harold's medical condition than she should have. A new thought occurred to me. Detective, what about Harold's will? Nova said he had changed it. That part was true. Harold did add a suspicious death clause 3 weeks before he died. If either you or he died under questionable circumstances within 5 years of each other, the inheritance would go to charity instead of family members. But there's more. She pulled out another document. Harold also created a separate trust for you, completely independent of the will. Even if the suspicious death clause had been triggered, you would still have been financially secure. Fresh tears started rolling down my cheeks. Even when Harold thought I was losing my mind, even when he was afraid I couldn't take care of myself, he had been making sure I would be protected. He really loved you, Detective Chen said quietly. I know. I just wish I had realized sooner what was happening to him. Mrs. Caldwell, there's no way you could have known. Nova's plan was very sophisticated. She researched digitalis poisoning for months before she started. She knew exactly how to make it look like natural heart failure. How did she get the digitalis? She grew foxglove plants in her garden. Digitalis is extracted from foxglove, and it's actually not that difficult to do if you know what you're looking for. She had been planning this for almost a year. The scope of Nova's deception was staggering. While I had been worrying about Harold's health and trying to be a supportive wife, she had been plotting his murder with cold, calculated precision. What happens now? Nova will likely take a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. She'll spend the rest of her life in prison. You're free to go home whenever you're ready, though we recommend having the house thoroughly cleaned and checked for any other surveillance equipment or hidden dangers. Home. The word felt strange now. How could I ever feel safe in that house again, knowing what had happened there? Knowing that Nova had been poisoning Harold in our own kitchen, switching his pills in our own bathroom. Mrs. Caldwell, there's someone here to see you. I looked up to see Marcus standing in the doorway of the interview room. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few hours. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his eyes were red from crying, and his clothes looked like he'd thrown them on without looking. Nadine, he said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He crossed the room and wrapped me in a hug that felt like a lifeline. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly safe. It's not your fault, Marcus. You couldn't have known. But I should have seen the signs. I should have protected you and Dad. We held each other and cried for Harold, for the life that Nova had stolen from him, and for the trust that had been shattered forever. But underneath the grief, I felt something else beginning to take root. Relief. For the first time in months, I could breathe freely. The constant anxiety I'd been feeling, the sense that something was wrong but not knowing what, it was all finally explained. I was going to survive this. Harold was gone, and nothing would ever bring him back. But I was alive, and I was going to make sure his memory was honored. Nova had taken his life, but she hadn't won. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, making coffee in the quiet morning light. The view from my window showed a small garden courtyard instead of the sprawling backyard Harold and I had tended together for so many years. Everything was smaller here, simpler, but it felt safe in a way my old house never could again. I'd sold the house 3 months after Nova's arrest. Marcus had helped me sort through everything, deciding what to keep and what to let go. We'd found more evidence of Nova's deception hidden throughout the house. Spare vials of digitalis taped under the kitchen sink, extra lactose pills hidden in my jewelry box, even a spare key sheet had made and hidden in the garage. The sale had gone quickly. I'd used some of the money to buy this little apartment in a senior living community about 20 minutes away from Marcus. It wasn't assisted living. I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself, but it had security, a community center, and neighbors who looked out for each other. My phone rang, interrupting my peaceful morning routine. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Morning, Nadine. How are you feeling today?" It was a question he asked every time we talked, and I knew he was really asking whether I was having nightmares, whether I was jumping at shadows, whether I was okay being alone. The truth was, some days were harder than others, but most days, like today, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. "I'm good, Marcus. Really good. I wanted to let you know. Nova's sentencing is next week, Tuesday at 2 p.m. You don't have to be there if you don't want to. I'd been thinking about this for weeks. Part of me wanted to face her one more time, to look her in the eye and let her see that she hadn't broken me. But another part of me just wanted to close this chapter and move forward. I think I'd like to be there. Will you come with me?" "Of course. We'll face it together." Marcus had been my lifeline through all of this. After Nova's arrest, he'd filed for divorce immediately. He'd also started therapy to deal with the guilt of not seeing the signs of his wife's true nature. We'd grown closer than we'd ever been before, united by our shared grief and our determination to honor Harold's memory. "How are the wedding plans coming?" I asked, deliberately changing the subject to something happier. Marcus was engaged to Jennifer, a kindergarten teacher he'd met at a grief support group. She was everything Nova wasn't: honest, kind, genuinely caring. She made Marcus smile again, which was all I'd ever wanted for him. "Good. Jenny's been asking if you'd like to help with the flower arrangements. She doesn't want to overstep, but she knows you used to do Harold's company events." I smiled. Jennifer was always careful not to replace me or make me feel like an outsider. She understood that my relationship with Marcus was precious to both of us, and she'd never tried to interfere with it. "I'd love to help. Tell her I'll call her this afternoon." After we hung up, I walked to my small living room and sat in the recliner that had been Harold's favorite chair. It was the only piece of furniture I'd kept from the old house, and sitting in it still made me feel close to him. On the side table was a framed photo from our last anniversary, Harold's arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera. We'd been so happy that day, completely unaware that we only had 3 months left together. Next to the photo was a letter that had arrived yesterday, forwarded from my old address. The return address showed it was from Sarah Mitchell. I'd been putting off reading it, not sure I was ready to revisit that horrible night, but now, in the quiet safety of my new life, I felt strong enough. "Dear Nadine," the letter began in Sarah's careful handwriting, "I hope you can forgive an old woman for taking so long to write this letter. The truth is, I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me after everything that happened." I settled deeper into Harold's chair and continued reading. "I want you to know that watching over you was never a burden. Harold asked me to look out for you, and it became the most important thing in my life. When I realized what Nova was doing, I was terrified I wouldn't be able to stop her in time." Sarah went on to explain that she'd moved back to Florida after Nova's arrest, but she thought about me often. She'd enclosed newspaper clippings about Nova's trial and sentencing, along with copies of all the photos and videos she'd taken during her surveillance. "I thought you might want these for your own records," she wrote. "Sometimes having proof of what really happened can help with the healing process." At the bottom of the letter was a phone number and an invitation to visit her in Florida anytime I wanted. "Harold talked about you so much over the years that I feel like I know you," she wrote. "I'd love the chance to share some of those stories with you, If you're interested. I folded the letter carefully and set it back on the table. Maybe someday I would take Sarah up on her offer. It might be healing to hear Harold's voice through someone else's memories. My doorbell rang and I looked through the peephole to see Mrs. Chen from down the hall. She was holding a covered dish and wearing the kind of determined expression that meant she wasn't taking no for an answer. "Nadine, dear, I made too much casserole again. You simply must help me eat it." Mrs. Chen was 83 years old and had appointed herself as my unofficial grandmother. She'd lived through the Japanese internment camps during World War II, lost her husband to cancer, and raised 4 children on her own. She had no patience for self-pity or dwelling on the past. "Come in, Mrs. Chen. I'll put on some tea." She bustled into my kitchen and started serving the casserole before I could protest. "You're looking better today. Less sad around the eyes." It was true. The constant weight of grief and fear that I'd carried for so long was finally beginning to lift. I would always miss Harold, but I was learning to live with the loss instead of being crushed by it. "I've been thinking about taking a trip," I said as we sat down to eat. "Maybe visiting some places Harold and I always talked about seeing." Mrs. Chen's eyes lit up. "Where were you thinking?" "Ireland. Harold's grandmother was from County Cork, and he always wanted to trace his family history there." "Then you should go. Life is for the living, Nadine. Harold would want you to see the world, not sit in this apartment feeling sorry for yourself." She was right, of course. Harold had always been the one who encouraged me to be adventurous, to try new things. Before Nova's deception had consumed our lives, we'd been planning a trip to Europe for our 45th anniversary. That evening, I opened my laptop and started researching flights to Dublin. It felt strange at first, planning a vacation alone. But as I looked at photos of green hills and ancient castles, I felt excitement building for the first time in months. I was 65 years old. I had survived a murder attempt, exposed my husband's killer, and found the strength to rebuild my life from scratch. I wasn't the same woman who had sat in that cemetery 6 months ago, paralyzed by grief and confusion. That woman had been trusting to a fault, dependent on others to make decisions for her, willing to accept things that didn't seem quite right rather than rock the boat. This woman was different. This woman asked questions, trusted her instincts, and refused to be anyone's victim. As I clicked purchase on the airline ticket, I felt Harold's presence in the room with me. Not in a ghostly or supernatural way, but in the echo of his voice, encouraging me to be brave, to live fully, to find joy even in the midst of sorrow. Nova was serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. She would spend the rest of her days paying for what she'd done to Harold and what she'd tried to do to me. But I was free. Free to travel, to make new friends, to rebuild my life however I wanted. Free to honor Harold's memory by living the kind of full, adventurous life he would have wanted for me. The phone calls from that mysterious number had saved my life, but they'd given me something even more valuable than that. They'd given me back my strength. Tomorrow I would call Marcus and tell him about my travel plans. I would call Jennifer and help plan her flowers. I would call Mrs. Chen and ask if she wanted to come to Ireland with me. But tonight, I sat in Harold's chair and felt truly peaceful for the first time since the day he died. Nova had taken many things from me, my husband, my sense of safety, my ability to trust easily. But she hadn't taken everything. She hadn't taken my spirit. And that was something she would never ever touch again. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.